Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Fascinating SEC matchup. Kentucky heading on the road to play Ole Miss. You look at this Kentucky team, we just saw them a couple weeks ago give Georgia everything they could handle. You look at this Ole Miss team, Dill, the Ole Miss haters have been out in force. Ole Miss hasn't played anybody. Ole Miss is overrated. Well, guess what? The teams that have been put in front of Ole Miss, they have taken care of business with. Not only is the offense putting up some video game numbers, this Ole Miss defense has been awfully impressive as well. And I think the main event here, this Kentucky defense that I think is a very good defense, it has NFL talent at all three levels, going up against what might be the best offense that we see in the country in Ole Miss. Something's going to have to give. Fired up to get into it. Now, before we do, and as always, most importantly, let it fly in the comment section. That is by far the best part about doing these game predictions and previews, whether you agree with the boys, whether you disagree. Let it fly in the comment section. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, without further ado, we got to start with this Ole Miss offense going up against a Kentucky defense that, again, I think is very good. Ole Miss has been putting up video game numbers, right? 48 points per game. That's number 6 in the country. Jaxson Dart, an 80% completion percentage. His average depth of target's over 10 yards down the field. That is a ludicrous stat line. He is completing 62% of his passes 20-plus yards down the field. That's higher than a lot of quarterbacks' completion percentage, period. That's what Jaxson Dart's doing 20-plus yards down the field. We've seen this kid take steps, and I think you're seeing him take another step in 2024. The big bugaboo for Jaxson Dart at times was hitting on those shots, right? Lane Kiffin will dial it up. You have guys like Juice Wells and Trey Harris on the outside. Now you just got to make the throws. Not many quarterbacks making those throws more effectively than Jaxson Dart to start the season. How do you see this Ole Miss offense versus this Kentucky defense going here?
Yeah, and I get you want to talk about Jaxson Dart, but I think this is only going to be the test for me of what this Ole Miss offensive line's about. Because frankly, I mean, I thought they played okay against Wake Forest. It's not like they were getting dominated by any stretch of the imagination, but I don't think they were exactly imposing their will either. And I kind of look, you got a lot of new faces in through the portal. I think their rotation's a little bit strange, frankly, and I wonder if they're going to find their starting five and get that group rolling because they're rotating a lot of guys through the early parts of football games. But they're going to have a huge test because this Kentucky defensive line kind of took it to Georgia a little bit.
Yes.
And Ole Miss, if they're going to take that next step, yeah, we know Jaxson Dart's really good. We know they have some really good skill position as well. I still want to see if they can physically hold up against a top-tier defensive line in my mind.
So my comment on the offensive line is sometimes it doesn't look as physically imposing on the film because they run that RPO stuff where the offensive lineman can't really block downfield because they're going to get called for ineligible down the field. So, yeah, sometimes you're like, hey, why aren't we just moving Wake Forest off the line of scrimmage routinely? I think a lot of that has to do with just that RPO run style where we're not really allowing our offensive linemen to really drive off the football. But I think you're right. Like, you haven't seen a defensive front even close to what you're going to see from Kentucky. And Kentucky took it too, like you said, one of, if not the best offensive line in the country with Georgia. So I think you're very right in saying, our eyeballs are going to be on the line of scrimmage. We've spent all offseason hyping up this Ole Miss team and say, hey, why have they closed the gap in the SEC? It's because they've addressed both sides of the line of scrimmage. This is one of those games where you kind of figure out how good Ole Miss is specifically on the offensive line. Dill, I think one of the things I love about Ole Miss is how multidimensional they are. Like, you watch their film and just say so many different ways they can attack a defense. And you look at Kentucky and say, they got some dudes at all three levels, like we said. That being said, I don't think they're all dudes. And Ole Miss has a lot of guys. Lane Kiffin's been an expert at kind of finding the matchups that he wants, whether it's moving Juice Wells around, whether it's Trey Harris on the outside, or whether if you're going to light box him, they're running the football for 6.1 yards per carry. Dill, Henry Parrish has 17 carries that have gone for plus 10 yards.
He fits their scheme so well, I feel like. And that's the thing I think that's a little underrated is Ole Miss's scheme is not for every running back, I wouldn't say. Because of what you said, they're not trying to move guys off the line of scrimmage. You need to be really good at kind of being patient, finding your hole, and then having the acceleration to get through it quickly when linebackers aren't always getting blocked up. Because, again, for the reasons you said, they don't go down the field typically. They're the offensive linemen have to kind of stay in that 2-yard box. But if you're a really explosive, quick running back like Henry Parrish is, you can really do some damage. And he's doing it because obviously they really spread teams out. They have to play with, or they always pretty much always are probably going to see a lot of light boxes this year to deal with all the weapons they have on the outside. And Henry Parrish is really kind of feasting so far. It'll be interesting to see if he can deal with some really, really good linebackers and really good defensive line, obviously.
And what stood out to me about Henry Parrish is he's running the football hard. Like, I feel like the narrative around Henry Parrish, even going back to when he was at Ole Miss and even when he was at Miami, was kind of a smaller, quicker, speedier running back. He is the bell cow for this Ole Miss offense, and he's been doing it extremely effectively. Like, he's holding up to the workload, but I think more importantly, he's running the rock extremely hard. This is an Ole Miss team that wants to run fast. They want to string together first downs. You need a running back that can keep you on schedule. Henry Parrish has done that. And I think the second matchup you're looking at is just how do you get to work against a Kentucky secondary that gives a lot of quarterbacks problems. They play very, very just solid zone coverage. There are not a ton of throwing windows. What I'm most looking for is, can Jackson Arnold just be patient? I mean, they've played a lot of teams that they've just been able to play some flag 7-on-7 against and just kind of light it up on the scoreboard. This is a defense where you're going to have to be a little bit more patient. Yes, I expect Ole Miss to be explosive, but you don't want to force anything. And Jaxson Dart's made so many strides in terms of not forcing throws. This Kentucky team is going to try to bait you into doing that. Can Jaxson Dart just take what's there, rely on his playmakers on the outside? That's the last thing I'm looking at. Dill, let's flip the sides because this Kentucky offense, I'm just concerned about the pass protection. I think a lot of Kentucky fans would agree with that. I'm like kind of high on Brock Vandergriff, and I get he's made some throws that frustrate you. You know what I mean? Turning the football over. That being said, this kid has a ton of juice in his arm, and he knows it, and he tries to make some high-level throws. But my biggest question mark here is, what did the trenches look like? You know, Kentucky wants to run the football. They're running the football 61% of the time. I think a large part of that has to do with just not being able to hold up in pass protection. Dill, here's a stat that I don't think a lot of people saw coming 4 weeks through the season. Number 1 rushing defense in the country. Yeah, that would be Ole Miss, allowing 1.2 yards per carry. JJ Pegas JJ Pegas is a guy that's not going to attract the national spotlight like Walter Nolan or Princely you are. That being said, that dude does so much dirty work on the inside, freeing up some of those linebackers. I'm excited to see because, again, Ole Miss hasn't seen a line of scrimmage play like this. What does Ole Miss look like in the trenches on the defensive side of football, specifically in that front seven, because they've looked so good so far?
In Kentucky's offensive line, I think is getting a little bit of a bad rep in a sense because obviously they looked horrible in the pass against South Carolina and like really bad. And Ole Miss, if they have to pass the ball out, if they can't establish the run, that's going to be a huge problem. But I will say Kentucky's offensive line, when they kind of got to the run game a little bit with Georgia, I was very, very impressed. And again, their tackle pass pro is bad. And I don't think that's going to get fixed, obviously. And Princely U is going to have a field day. I think Perkins going to have a field day. But if they can kind of establish the run, I think this team can be a little bit more dangerous than probably people think. So, again, that's going to be the test. You obviously have some smaller athletic linebackers for Ole Miss who do a really good job playing in space. But I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. Their defensive line's playing much more physical than I think we've seen in the past. I think J.J. Pegas' level's up. I think Walter Nolan's playing really, really well. And then I think Ivy's a really good piece kind of for that defensive end role to be tough against a team like Kentucky.
Jared Ivey's arguably been the best defensive lineman on this team. And he was like not a guy that got a ton of attention because he wasn't a transfer portal addition. He's been phenomenal. You're probably right. Like, you look at the most important statistic in this game for this kind of match for Kentucky's offense versus Ole Miss defense, it's what does first and second down look like? Like, if Kentucky can run the football and stay out of those third and long situations, like they have some weapons on the outside. Danke just went for 100 yards. Barian Brown is a legitimate difference maker. He can change the game with one play. But if Kentucky's not winning on first and second down, getting behind the chains, it's not where you want to be with this Ole Miss pass rush. I'm going to read you some stats here. Jared Ivey, 7 quarterback hurries. Perkins, he's got 12 quarterback hurries. I mean, they've figured out how to use Perkins, and he's been playing that role exceptionally well. Walter Nolan, 9. JJ Pegas, 10 quarterback hurries. We said we wanted to see a step from him in being a difference maker. Hey, we know you can do the dirty work, big dog. Can you be a better pass rusher? He's done it. Princely U, I think one of the best pure pass rushers in the country. If Kentucky's living in those third and long situations, allowing Ole Miss to pin their ears back and get after the quarterback, I think that's really, really dangerous. And I think Amos and Hamilton on the outside have been really good for Ole Miss too at the cornerback spot. Let's get into the pick here. Kentucky on the road, 17.5-point dogs. Who you got?
Give me the Rebels. I still am not very sold on what Brock Vandagriff's going to be. I think he makes way too many mistakes for me. I still am very concerned that, again, if they can't get the run game going, and I like where Ole Miss is kind of at in terms of what they're doing physically against teams like Wake Forest. I mean, they were beating them up front on the line of scrimmage, like in a way that made me more encouraged than I've typically been for Ole Miss, where it's like, okay, they're hanging on against these type of teams. But they're starting to really impose their will. Again, I think J.J. Pegas is probably the guy who took the biggest step for them. I like that the fact if they can, again, just like contain this run, I think they're going to have a long day. And I think they're still going to score. I like Kentucky's defense, but I just don't think there's really any truly stopping Ole Miss right now with all those weapons.
The thing with that matchup is, like, if you give almost enough possessions, like, they're going to score. Like, I love Kentucky's defense, but the way Kentucky's been on offense, just not being able to stay on the field, you give enough possessions to Ole Miss, they're going to break through. The floodgates are going to open. Dill, one comment, Ole Miss beating up on Wake Forest as an alum. I don't know if that's something to hang your hat on. We're going to find out more about this Ole Miss team along the lines of scrimmage against
Kentucky. I mean, it's all we can go.
It's all we have.
I've seen Ole Miss not beat the piss out of teams they should be beating up front. I mean, obviously they always can get in that track meet and kind of take it to that teams, but I've seen them not physically impose their will on much worse teams. So again, I think they're kind of taking a little bit of a step. I certainly would like to see their offensive line play good. That's probably the big question in terms of
I agree. That's the biggest thing we'll learn from this game is Kentucky's defensive line versus Ole Miss offensive line. I'll take Ole Miss too. I need to see it more from the Kentucky offense. Like, Kentucky was able to play good defense against Georgia and kind of hang around. If you can't move the football against Ole Miss, like, at some point Ole Miss is going to start running the track meet. And I think that this offense is so multidimensional. They can hurt you in so many different ways. I think this Ole Miss team is ready. They've looked apart all season. I'm going to trust my eyeballs. It's a lot of points, but Ole Miss at home, give me the 17.5 points. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. Let it fly in the comment section, and we'll talk to y'all later.